There is a form of music called kirtan that is based upon call and response. And so I like the term call and response because it fits so many things. And sometimes when you and I call into that which is the great mystery, the great creator, if we are quiet enough on the inside, we can hear the response. And I love the idea of the ebb and flow, the back and forth, and the participation of call and response. So we're also going to do that today with a word. And that word is opening. So every time that I go like this, oh, I got to be careful not to do this when I talk. Every time that I do this, you're going to respond back to me with opening. So practice 1, 2, 3. Opening. Ah, beautiful. So I found religious science, science of mind, through a beloved woman who became my second mother by the name of Louise Hay. And many of you might know that story. And I was fortunate enough to be able to travel with her as a part of a singing trio called Alliance. And this was back at an era of the 1980s where Louise, or Mama Lulu, as we called her, was the singular mainstay or the singular anchor in a very turbulent time. It was the other pandemic, and it was a pandemic very much different than the one we've all experienced recently, because there was a great stigma to this one because it was targeted towards a specific demographic. And in that pandemic, and with Louise's support, she was providing for those who felt shunned, for those who felt separate, to find a place of camaraderie, a place of healing. And one of the things that I learned from Louise mostly was that healing is different than curing. And oftentimes what we are seeking in our pain and our suffering is a cure or something to take that thing away. And it was a powerful revelation for me to realize that in this situation, in this unknown disease, that even though most of the people that were gathering in mass that kept evolving and growing over time, even though they may have entered the doors seeking out a cure, what they did receive more than anything, which I found to be now even more important, was an atmosphere of healing. And so healing is different than curing. And I remember thinking about that oftentimes, and I remember thinking about my own journey, and because of being with Louise and her background as a Science of Mind minister, I began to enter into the foray of wanting to know more about what she knew. And I considered myself a nerd, so I loved classes, and I lived in Los Angeles, and so there was a plethora of religious science churches in Los Angeles, and in this trio called Alliance, we started to float around between people like Louise Hay and Marianne Williamson. I used to call all of these powerful women in Southern California the perpetual women of gauze and shoulder pads, because this was in the 80s when they all had the dynasty shoulder pads and the big goddess wear. So we just went from one goddess to the other, and we sang and we opened for them, and it was an embarrassment of riches to be able to be in these environments multiple times every single week. And it was also a trial by fire, because in these communities there was a deep overlap of people dealing with this particular crisis and this pandemic. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot riding shotgun next to Louise. I learned a lot by observing the way that she was with people when they were in a great deal of suffering, not just physical suffering, but also emotional suffering. And I too, just like you, I believe, we all enter into environments like this, a spiritual community or some type of relief from this pain and suffering, looking for looking for something. We don't even know if it's a cure or if it's a healing. We just want relief. And I remember the first time that I really cracked open the books of Ernest Holmes. And the thing that was the most significant to me was not found in the big textbook, but it was in his first book that he wrote in 1919 called Creative Mind and Success. Became my all-time favorite writing of Ernest Holmes. And in there, in a little segment called Mental Equivalence, he began to write something, and I got down to this particular line, and it said, daily, try to see more and to understand more and to feel every day that you are being especially looked after. And that phrase, especially looked after, was exactly what this young man called David really wanted. Because to me, that was an energy of nurturing. And I say, and I now refer to myself as the self, the small s self, identified as David, really needed a lot of nurturing. Because I didn't have that in my homegrown environment. Stereotypical poverties, and I'm not dismissing it. Stereotypical abuse, and I'm not dismissing it or making light of it. But my experience wasn't any different than a vast majority of sentient beings around the globe who grow up in the same situation. And as I was maturing and growing and seeking, just because I left my hometown in Beaumont, Texas, doesn't mean like that Beaumont, Texas left this skin suit. So everywhere I went, I carried the absorption of all of those feelings and all of those experiences housed within this physical instrument, this small s self that I call David. And we all do that. And we're excellent. This is something for you to give yourself credit for, that we are great managers of small s self. Because we build these internal protection systems, we curate the way in which we're going to enter into spaces. We have all of these managerial skills in order to lessen the pain that we're carrying with us that most of the time is just simply unconscious. And so to hear the words, I want you now to walk through your day, not necessarily trying to manage all of that so much, but to shift focus and to see yourself as being especially looked after. So it's kind of like a co-managership. It's like a partnership. Like you're going to do some of the navigation and you're going to brush your teeth and pay your taxes, but you're also going to feel like you're being especially looked after. And so that became sort of the entry road or the textbook path by which I first began to really apply, study, and embody the science of mind teaching. And I, again, would sit by Louise and I observed her in very difficult situations. And she influenced me so greatly that I decided that I wanted to emulate what she had done, and I found myself in not only taking the classes, but finishing all of them. And having a very crafty teacher who said, David, I know you don't want to be a practitioner, but why don't you just take the test? I was like, okay, I'll take the test. And then passing the test, she said, I know you don't want to take ministerial study, but it's a whole different level of study. Why don't you just take it? Because I think you would really enjoy it. You don't have to be a minister. And I said, okay. And so I took all of the classes, and she goes, you might as well just go all the way and do the test and the panels and all your oral examinations and all the things that are, to finalize this. You don't have to really do anything with it. And I went, okay. And, because I was an actor also, so I had one foot into that lane, and then I was traveling with Louise, and then I was studying to take all these courses, to being a minister that I was not going to be a minister. And then all of a sudden, there I was graduating. And I was like, oh. And the movement didn't know what to do with me because I was not wanting to take a brick and mortar center. because I had been traveling with Louise. I had, by this point, been in hundreds of unity and religious science and New Thought centers around the world, and I was having a ball having the experience of looking at all the ways in which people do what we're doing this morning. And it was the best thing that I ever learned outside of a classroom. And I thought, I want to keep doing this. I want to speak, I want to sing, I want to do those kinds of things. And the organization at that time said, no, you've got to anchor yourself in a center, and then in order to be eligible for ordination, you've got to get all these points. And they didn't have anything now, and now because of me, they have something called a focus ministry. Because they didn't know what to do with me, and I was very annoying. But here we are, all of these years later, and there have been incredible iterations of being a platform minister. And what I want to share with you today is that in all of those iterations, there was still the little boy from Texas managing things. So I call that, again, that part of me, small s self. And in our retreat this weekend, I was referring to that part of us that we're constantly managing as self-referential. Self-referencing the self. And so if you think about it, everywhere we go, we are entering into that space, that community, that relationship, that communication, that interaction as self-referential. Meaning, we're thinking about, is this going to be safe? Are they going to like me? All of these things that we are navigating in order to do what? To preserve, to protect, to manage even all of the unconscious things that are a part of this self-referential being that we're not even aware that we're doing. It's all of the things that we show up in that lead the way. It's as if the energy of self-referential walks through the door before we do. And so I began to see that the science of mind, and the phrase especially looked after, was navigating that part of me. It was the nurturing part of the self-referential. Self-referential. And I don't know about you, but I use this analogy a lot, that as I enter into these practices, it's like entering into a cave. So in order to heal the traumas, or in order to heal this uncomfortableness, or the idea of not being enough, all of the things, the weight of the self-referential that we bring into things. I hope that they like me. I hope that I get it right. Oh my God, I need to lose weight. Oh my God, I'm aging. I mean, it's all of the things that we bring into these experiences. And we realize not only that there's weight there, but that the mind is very busy. There is no real stillness. There is no real quiet, because we are managing. We are calculating. Even if we don't have words for that. And so as long as then we enter in these experiences thinking, believing that what we are singularly is that self, then that management system will always be going on. And so we take classes and we do things within these teachings and in any other spiritual teaching about meditating and about calming. And we even hear this principle repeated week after week after week. There is only one power. There is only one presence. And we call that power and we call that presence God. So we hear that. Or I should say, the self-referential part hears that. And it too feels nurturing up until we sort of, in this cave journey, get to the back of the cave, and then we got some real stuff going on in our private world. Or we get caught in the loop of all of the noise in the external world that's happening right now. And we lose our footing, And even though we still love the idea that the only reality is love and the only reality is God, now we're questioning, because how does that apply to the atrocities that continue to happen in the world? How could Ernest Holmes write that? How could that be the fundamental thing of this teaching when there is still so much disparity in the world? And so we start to see that all of the people like me who entered into these doors, like those doors, that entered in solely identified as small s self, we reach a saturation point. I reached a saturation point, and I was a minister. And I thought, how can I stand in front of people week after week, stating these principles, praying the prayer, and recognizing at the same time that the majority of the people out there in my membership were experiencing great hardship and sorrow and difficulty? How can I stand up there and say there's only one power? Don't you know? As if I can't recognize and understand the struggle of the small s self that keeps showing up. And so what I realized, and I know I haven't done this, the word is opening. So what I realized is that when you get to the back of that cave where the suffering and the imbalance of trying to take the principle of the teaching and also navigate the world in your skin suit of small s self is so overwhelming, there has to be an opening to something greater than what we thought the teaching was when we first walked in a very confined identity. Let me say that again. I walked into the doors. I heard, feel as though you're especially looked after. I loved it, but what loved it? The small s self loved it. And even though that was beautiful, beautiful, I realized that my mind is still not quiet. I realized that there is still something within me that doesn't quite understand what it means to be free. What is that? Because I understand that what I'm managing is my infiniteness. And at some point, am I willing to see the past my infiniteness? Did you follow that? So if your name is Shirley, if your name is Mike, if your name is Ralph, if your name is Lucy, is there a place where you are willing to see the past those identities? So we like to call those identities Channel 1. Channel 1 is who you are. Gender, culture, religion, upbringing, belief systems, traumas, stories, victories, identities, education, labels, identity, credentials, all of the stories, all of the Channel 1. Channel 1 is small s self. And yes, it's true. We can go through an entire incarnation and only operate on Channel 1. We can even study a multidimensional, or I would say an infinite channel doctrine, and still study it from Channel 1. Channel 1, then, if I'm only in Channel 1 and I'm studying the science of mind, I'm always asking this: what's in it for me? How can I improve the identity of Channel 1? And I do not believe that that's the reference point by which Ernest Holmes wrote this teaching. And it's still going to serve us to a point. But if there's a point then in that journey, and I call it the divine discontent, it's getting to the back of the cave repeatedly over and over again until at the back of the cave we go, I'm so tired of Channel 1. Is there anything that is to what must be beyond this? And that's when the science of mind teaching comes alive. Because if you think about it, it's very hard to say there is one power and there is one presence, and to speak those words only from the channel one identity. It was for me because I took responsibility as being the one speaking those words to people. So the invitation was, if you want to see what the opening is, David, then what do you have to do? You have to untangle yourself from everything that is a part of your channel one identity. Untangle does not mean disown, because this is still the vessel I was given. That's the vessel that you've been given. That is what we call the relative. Any of you ever studied Thomas Troard? And he said, you have to have the relative in order to have the absolute. And the absolute needs the relative in order to create this confluence of expansion and good and experience of what infinite means. That means this channel one finite costume, this is our costume, operates to the degree. If I'm trying to manage this, preserve this, most of us, you can really sit with this and understand, most of us, what we are trying to do is to postpone death. Postpone something. Postpone uncertainty. Postpone the trauma. Postpone those things. So we're decorating. We're decorating environments, and it gets exhausting when most of what's the undercurrent of the way in which we are doing life is managing environment and hoping. But when you start to untangle yourself from who am I beyond David, then we call that awareness. Your awareness. Doshin Buddhism puts it this way. The best metaphor that they could come up with back in the 12th century to define what you really are is sky. So when the I am is what I am is I am sky operating as David speaking to those of you who are sky sitting in, put your name there. Did you see what I'm doing there? And so the practice then becomes, every time I get caught up in self-referential, there is always an opening. And so oftentimes as I think back through the teaching, I remember a time still teaching from self-referential, and someone did something horrific to me. It was one of the greatest betrayals and abandonments, and I was so filled with rage that I wanted CNN to do an expose on this person and watch them be eviscerated on public television. And I had a really hard time because here I am supposed to be a minister of a teaching that says there's only one power and one presence, and inside I am boiling. And I remember thinking, I can't do this. I can't continue to show up and say these words in integrity and feel this inside of me. And I have this little game that I played then, and I still play it now, where I speak it into the awareness and I say, I need help. I'm available for help. And the next day, a friend of mine named Jeff called me, and he lived in New York City, and he says, hey, I was at a party last night and your name came up. And I told them, you moved to Alabama. And we were all like, what? And then this man, and this was a very known psychiatrist, therapeutic, spiritual person who was often referred to as the healer of the healers. And he said, he was there, your name came up, and he goes, David's in Alabama? And he said, yeah, he just moved to Mobile. And he goes, I'm from Fairhope, right next to Mobile. I'm going to be there in 2 days. Give David my number. I had just said to the universe what? I need help. And now I'm like, whoa, here's this person. I meet them for dinner. He opens up and he says, tell me what's going on. So I tell him. I just say, I'm having a challenge. I feel such rage and I can't use anything in my bag of tricks to resolve it. And he just looked at me and he says, I'm going to ask you a question. And he said, why do you think that happiness doesn't last? Now, this was a very big person, so I wanted to impress him. So I'm going through the Rolodex of all of my science of mind training, thinking of the right thing to say. And I give some science of mind answer, and he goes, no. And he said, happiness doesn't last because you don't have a resistance to happiness. And just like you're doing now, I was like, huh? And he said, and as he's talking, I'm imagining a figure 8. And he said, in the middle of this figure 8, or in this thing that we called the field of experience and emotion, something sparks happiness or joy or laughter. And in the inception point, it travels. And as it's traveling, you're now emoting. You're laughing, you're giggling, you're, laughing so hard that soda comes out of your nose. You're just so in the moment of allowing the thing that sparked it, the inception, to freely flow through you. And when it's done, it then just goes back into the beautiful energy field, and perhaps you continue it, but there's nothing inside of you that's trying to manage it. You're just freely experiencing it. He goes, do you understand? Happiness, it's not supposed to last. You're just supposed to feel it fully, and then it will just keep coming back like an ocean wave, ebb and flow, because you have absolutely no resistance to it. And then he said, do you know why anger lasts? Now I'm smart, and I go, because I have a resistance to it? And he said, where do you think that came from? From the thought that spiritual people, or people who are in your position, do not have the right to feel anger. And so what happens is you have this experience. Here's the inception point. This someone out in the field of effect does something. You feel a certain way. It starts to travel. And right when you get back to this point, you go, good little boys and girls don't feel this way. Spiritual people don't feel this way. And so then it just remains lodged in this place, and you continue forth spouting off all the things self-referential. Meantime, it's just building and building and building until what happens? Like a carburetor in an old car. Do you remember taking the thing off very carefully? Sometimes somebody just looks at you wrong and boom. And I said, okay, what am I supposed to do? He goes, it's just energy, David. And so we talked about it and we explored it. And so he encouraged me, stick your head in a tub and scream in your bath water. Or what we came up with was every time you get in your car, roll the windows up and just scream. So my ride from my home to my little center that I had started in Mobile, Alabama, was about 12 minutes. So every day I would scream all the way to work, stop, go in and do my thing, scream all the way back. And he gave instructions. You're not screaming at the event. You're screaming as if you are providing an outlet for all of this lodged energy to just expel itself. I can't imagine if you lived in Mobile, Alabama at that time and you pulled up beside me at a red light, because Anyway, it worked. It worked for about 3 months. I was so hoarse, but I remember I had 2 golden retrievers and we went out for a walk, and I remember it was the night, and I was looking at the sky, and I thought about the person who was part of the story of the inception of that rage. And I thought, oh, wherever they are, they're under the same sky. And I had all these feelings. And it was just, all of a sudden, all that was gone. And it was just really beautiful. And I remember going, I wish them well. It was as if I had emptied that out. And the next day even, they called after not speaking for a year. I heard everything that I wanted to hear, but I didn't need it. I appreciated it. I loved it, but I didn't need it. But my point is that after that event, as wonderful as that story was and how moving that story was, it was still something that would continue on later on. So there would be other methods of screaming. There would be other methods of release. So the point was then, if you don't want to continue have to managing just channel one identity in this teaching, is it possible then that you can begin to extricate your identity and not see yourself as David, but just as an instrument of what? The one, awareness, sky. And that's what I've been doing. And recently in Texas, I went to a great niece's wedding. And I was sitting in the reception, and I had left there many years ago, and I was very uncomfortable. And I realized that I was sitting there as Channel 1 Identity David, going, God, I just want to get out of here. And as I sat there listening, the new iteration of Ernest's words of being especially looked after did this. Because I had been practicing just trying my best to allow myself to just be pure awareness. Boom. It said, the reason why you feel so uncomfortable, David, is because you're not the hero in anyone's story in here. And I remember going, ouch. And then I went, oh, whoa. The part that was feeling uncomfortable was my Channel 1 identity feeling as though I was still needing to be something in that environment. And all of a sudden, the part of me that had been practicing and opening up being awareness goes, you're not the hero in anyone's story. You can just be in this environment and flow love. And as I began to do that, I began to look at my great niece and just flow love and realize that all of the people who were a part of the family that is left were not the ones that were associated with the trauma from my childhood when I had built the story of being unsafe. None of those people were here. And yet, if I hadn't been practicing relinquishing my Channel 1 identity and allowing more of my capital S self to feel what it feels like to really know that wherever I go, yes, there is only one power and one presence. And now I'm going to take that and I'm going to combine it with my small s self, and I'm going to enter into this human world filled with suffering and need. And instead of resisting it, I'm going to lean into it as much as possible and do what I can to be the hands and the feet of what Ernest Holmes wrote about, that there is only one power, even in its apparent absence. And that is not bypassing. That is not burying my head in the sand. That is not trying to avoid anything. That is becoming a living and breathing, willing vessel to let go of whatever it takes that has an allegiance to restriction, to take this teaching into a whole different of a field of awareness and experience. And now, that's all that I want to do. And I know that I'm evolving and that I haven't arrived, but I will tell you, the mind is quieter. The practice continues. The stillness is longer. The practice continues. But I believe now that what Ernest Holmes was writing about was, this is a teaching that you can start to learn in a Channel 1 small s self, but the invitation and is, are you willing to take it bigger, deeper, wider, broader, in order to really understand just how much the infinite and the power of the infinite is housed in us and waiting for us to say, I'm available. And that's what I want you to begin to entertain today. And I ask you to close your eyes and experience a relief that says, I don't need to know how this works. I simply can begin to understand that I'm more than my Channel 1 identity. I can love the fact that I am especially looked after as this small s self me. And I can begin to see that my relationship to being especially looked after is even bigger, to where it reminds me I don't have to be the hero in anyone's narrative, because the absolute doesn't need. It simply is. I can begin to understand what it means to have my finite nature become more and more open, filled with the embodiment to the degree of what it means to be in an infinite relationship with creation itself. I can begin to taste what it feels like to begin to enter into spaces not concerned with what anything external thinks of me, to not push away or grab at any relief from my past or my story, but to begin to understand what it means when spirit is all that there is. And I can begin to relax into a brand new, expansive relationship of what it means to be especially looked after. Yes, this Channel 1 identity, the one that is sitting right there in the chair, the one that is saying, yeah, that's true for everybody else, but it's not true for me. Oh, if you only knew. Even that is just a thought. And the reality is that the thought is not holding us. We are holding it. And here's our opportunity to begin to experiment and to say, how much of the absolute am I willing to allow in today? What thought can I release my bloody grip and handle on the identity of Channel 1 and to begin to let it dissolve and untangle and unbind? And there's no better time to begin that than right now. So I breathe in. I breathe into the space that simply says, I'm available. I am willing. And I smile that this Sunday is not just like any other Sunday. Tomorrow will not be just like any other Monday. Now what goes forth is the opportunity to become available to the opening, to the opening, to the opening, to the opening that knows no time, that knows no history, that is truly whole, perfect, and complete. And if you are willing, simply say with me, and so it is.